Welcome everyone to the next panel. After Mr. Huta's keynote for this track, I'm sure that everybody is interested to dig more deeper, and we'll be touching upon the ONDC India Stack and overall DPI in today's session. So today we have Sanjay Jain. He is a partner at Bharat Innovation Fund and Chief Innovation Officer at CIIE.co. He's also volunteer with iSprint, the software product industry think tank of India. Sanjay has been an active member of India Stack, OpenAPI, and cashless teams. He has been working with NPCI to define the next generation payment systems, the Unified Payment Interface, which is UPI, as well as the regulators with other bodies to help entire process to go paperless. He has been in one of the key contributors to help create and evangelize various government OpenAPI policies, which are collectively referred as India Stack. During his career, Sanjay has been responsible for development of many large-scale, high-impact systems. He was Chief Product Manager at UIDAI, where he led the product development efforts from its early days till well after its launch. He was also responsible for creation of launch of Google Map Maker. Today, we also have Nithin Sharma, partner and co-lead at Antler India. So Nitin brings over a decade of experience in global venture capital, having invested in more than 50 plus tech startups in multiple geographies. Most recently, he was a founder of First Principle VC, a thesis-driven syndicate and portfolio of 35 startups, including Find, which is now acquired by Reliance, OnJoom, Nikki, Kutum, and Shares Post, which is acquired by Forge. Many other startups which are backed by marquee investors are part of Nitin's portfolio. Nitin's investing journey has previously spanned US venture capitals at NEA and begins a founding team, which is a principal Lightbox Ventures in India. ONDC and world's largest venture capital firms like Antler are working precisely on this plan to spawn new startups that are focused on democratizing India's online e-commerce platforms. And we'll be doing a bit more deeper dive on that at a later stage. Now, to begin with, Sanjay, I would like to go to you since you have been witnessing this digital public infrastructure journey in India. We have today with us startups from Asia Pacific, which may not have very good DPI concept, as well as the journey of India and the various building blocks. So can you help us to get a bird's eye view about DPI building blocks and the journey, how it started and how it unfolded here? Over to you, Sanjay.
Thanks, Prashant. Pleasure to be here and pleasure to have this conversation with all the startups that FIS is bringing to the table. To begin with, India's journey started with identity. Identity was an extremely important need for many of the underserved people in the country. There was really no good ID, and even more so, there's no good digital ID. So since you're building this ID in 2010, we felt that the right way to build it was to make it completely digital so that it could become a part of many different workflows. And at the same time, very inclusive so that we had very few barriers to bringing people into the system. As a result of this, the ID rollout took its own time because it's a biometric. It took about 5 to 6 years to roll out so that we could deduplicate everyone and give them an ID. At the same time, we put in ways by which the ID could become a part of many other journeys. So particularly very important for onboarding customers into, say, banking or mobile telephony and so on, as well as for pretty much any other use case where ID is used. So we basically built it up so that it could be a part of those workflows, and hence it was very easy to use. And as a result of that, people are able to prove their identity to meet any regulatory requirements that might be there. Particularly, in the financial sector, everything requires KYC, and we were able to meet that bar. As a result of that, the system started to be very useful for bringing people into the ecosystem. It reduced the barriers for people accessing financial services, and for the startups or businesses, it reduced costs of onboarding people. And this dual combination allowed us to rapidly expand our formal ecosystem. Once we got to a certain stage, the more, it started becoming interesting to think about how we could use the same thinking, build infrastructure that helps everyone at a really low cost in other parts of both government and private sector, which is where the partnership with NPCI was very useful. And that led to the creation of this new payment system called UPI. UPI per se in its design was fundamentally saying we don't need credit to do payments. People have money in their accounts, they should be able to pay right away. You take out the credit part, you take out the delay in payments, and as a result of which you actually remove a lot of costs. And that then again allows you to build a really low cost payment rails, which can be used by the entire economy. And that's what I think has worked well with UPI. What also an API first thinking does is it sort of allows you to bring in a lot of technology at the front end. And more importantly, technology players who are nimble will go out and bring people into the ecosystem. And so that again has done fairly well. Interestingly, payment APIs are part of the global open banking conversation as well. And in that, the other piece that is missing is really about data on accounts. And that's where the account aggregator comes in, where it allows people to share data about themselves and their bank accounts in a very digital manner so that people can build businesses on top of that. And that is really completes the open banking story, which is very similar to what we see in other parts of the world. Is you have an account data process and a payment initiation process, and that really combination is something which you have unlocked in India through these two mechanisms. And so for those who are looking at this from the outside, this has led to a massive growth in formalization in digital payments. And now we hope in credit, because the account aggregator information would help people, get access to credit based on their own data. Somewhere in this process, there are many other aspects to the India stack. But what it became important for us was to think in terms of a persona who we are serving, and that what that persona would need for getting an instant loan. And then, we started to make sure we were building all of the pieces around it in the form of digital infrastructure. And so that's been the journey so far. And now we, of course, have taken this thinking into other spaces, which may not be as relevant here, for example, health, but what may be relevant here is e-commerce. And so that thinking has helped us grow as a country. It helped our startups innovate and build things for our users. And we hope that these ideas, which are actually going around the world, become useful to others as well, and so that they can also build similar systems around the world. So, Prashant, you're on mute.
Sorry for that. Thanks, Sanjay. So, Nitin, you have been looking at this landscape from investment angles as well at Antler, and you probably are having a very focused strategy on ONDC as well as digital public infrastructure, and you have seen firsthand how startup ecosystem has been leveraging this in India and outside India as well. So as an investor, as well as a thought leader in the space, how do you see the evolution further, and as of today, how the startups are leveraging this concepts, and where we stand at this stage in terms of maturity in this area?
Thank you for having me. I think Sanjay laid it out very, very well in terms of the sequence. And for anyone outside India, I think India is the world's biggest lab for this very population scale digital public infrastructure experiment, which is playing out in a huge way. For those less familiar, the UPI payment system that Sanjay explained, I think it crossed 10 billion transactions last month. And this is still only 6 or 7 years old in terms of maturity. So, there has been a lot of consumer surplus created, transaction costs coming down, the velocity of digital payments and digital commerce in general just getting very accelerated in India because of this. And as was just pointed out, I think the next step of that is sort of commerce. So, you know, to your question, if you look at the UPI and India Stack impact on the startup ecosystem, I would say it's had a massive impact. India has some very large platforms like Paytm and PhonePe, which arguably would not have had this velocity and even capital efficiency if the public digital infrastructure wasn't there. And there has been a mammoth growth in sort of the fintech ecosystem overall. Last 2 months back, India had a global fintech fest, which is a fintech conference, and there were 75,000 registrations or something like that. Where else in the world can you have that? So I think that goes to show for anyone observing India that the digital public infrastructure has really been one of the fuels to create a massive expansion of the overall startup ecosystem. One observation, though, is that value creation wise, it has, while it has helped the consumer the most, a lot of the value has accrued to some platforms. Now, when you go to commerce, it could be different. And so from Antler's perspective, in India, we were very excited by the potential of ONDC, which is why we are spending quite a lot of time and created a specific initiative to help founders start new companies on top of ONDC protocol, or the backend protocol on top of which the ONDC framework is built. While maybe 70–80% of SMBs in India now have a QR code, and if any of the people in the audience have traveled in India recently, you will see that every kind of transaction is digitized and the payment is digitized. So some 70–80% of businesses have digital payments. Identity is close to 100% digital, but commerce is probably only 6 or 7% digital. So only 6 or 7% of businesses are actually selling something online. So that is the big gap that we need to bridge. How do you take 7% businesses selling online to closer to that 70–80% who are accepting digital payments? So that got us very excited because it seems like a real moonshot opportunity. It has a lot of execution challenges, but if it works in India, it creates a very interesting template for the rest of the world. The difference also is that with something like UPI and India Stack, the adoption is perhaps arguably more top-down. The framework, once it starts working at the policy level, because it involves the banking system, a small number of large players, you have to go top-down via governments and the large banks. ONDC, on the other hand, is more bottom-up, because the experiment is actually, instead of a small number of large players, you have a large number of small players, these businesses who want to be online or are not online. And also, it is not to say that this is something which is meant to be a company killer for the likes of Amazon or Flipkart. The thing to understand is that the way the makers of ONDC are thinking about it, it's really to expand the market for everyone. And small businesses who are not selling online, businesses who want to sell new categories which are not online, B2B which is not online, and even the large players like Amazon and Flipkart could meaningfully play and reinvent themselves in various ways if ONDC becomes very large. So it's a market expansion, category creation lens that the ecosystem in India is taking. And as I said, it could be very bottom up. So it may not work as quickly as UPI took off, but the impact could still be very substantial. So I think those are some reasons why we believe it's one of the next things where India could leapfrog. Those who have watched India for 20–30 years would have seen that there was IT services as a boom, then there was the mobile revolution, then there was the India Stack UPI revolution, which people like Sanjay created. And I think this has the potential to be the next leapfrogging opportunity in India, and hopefully has some interesting insights for everyone else as well.
Thanks, Nitin. Thanks for those insights. So let's kind of rewind back again, Sanjay, about the digital public infrastructure adoption history, challenges, and the issues that we were ready with or ready to face with. So specifically, like Nitin said, there are a lot of adoption challenges that we see, and I'll say it will take some time for ONDC to sink in. And this is also same story when we started with the India Stack journey. And there was a good amount of, I'll say, initial time that we had to spend on these areas to make sure that this larger, I'll say, Bharat is absorbing the benefits of the digital public infrastructure. So Sanjay, can you explain us some of the early adoption challenges that we see, and then the momentum that got built up, and what were the key milestones on the momentum built up on those areas, and specifically into the digital literacy as well as the information security, because once you start digitizing something, then there are more ways you can hack inside to it. And our success of the DPI journey really relies on making sure that that doesn't happen. In the sense, we are secure, we are in a privacy preserving manner, we are stepping into the new world there. So with your vantage point, you have seen this growing. So if you can explain us what were the adoption challenges that you saw and how the momentum was built, and how did we go into the replication mode? In some cases, it is more a specification. In some cases, we also have some like bodies like NPCI, which are actually giving the implementation for that as well. So over to Sanjay on the journey for adoption and challenges there.
So Prashant, thanks for that. I mean, as you, I think, pointed out, that to build systems that scale at such large numbers, there are 2 or 3 things that are very critical. The first is you have to give yourself time. These are moving the entire ecosystem. It's never going to be instantaneous, though it feels like that sometimes, that it's moved really fast. But Aadhaar, from the point we launched it to the time we saw the usage go up to become where it was significant, took many years. I mean, it took us 6 years to roll out the ID, to bring in and enroll people. And from the day we launched authentication and eKYC as APIs, the usage would grow. It grew steadily, I mean, as some percentage. And, as VCs, we are so used to seeing these exponential curves, which are all Excel magic. These exponential curves were real. They were, as the things grew, they would start to grow. And then at some point, they become visible to everyone, right? I mean, that's the nature of exponential growth. And we saw that with ID. We have seen that with payments. And payments, while it feels like it grew really fast, still took us 3 to 4 years to where it became significant. And ID took 6 years. And when I watched the curves on all of these systems that are being built, and with ONDC and OCEN and other APIs, we are seeing the same shape. So I'm actually quite optimistic that these systems will become real, will take off, and make a big impact. But you asked a couple of questions on how do we make sure that people are aware of what's happening so that they can take the appropriate steps to protect themselves, and how we build systems that are also inherently both incorporate privacy by design and as well as security. And so these cannot be afterthoughts. These are not things that you build first, break, and then decide on how to do it. So you actually have to, particularly in the financial sector, it's a very conservative sector, it's highly regulated. You can't do any of that. So we did make sure, so let's start with the basics of security. Security requires that all endpoints in the system, except the ones that are open to the world, have well-defined entities which are participating in the system. They're regulated, they're controlled, et cetera, right? So that is the first part in terms of the regulatory design, to make sure that there are most legs of the internal ecosystem. Every entity is known, identified. In our case, we use the public-private key infrastructure to make sure that they're all identified. All messages are either encrypted or signed. Data is stored at rest in an encrypted form. And all of these very basic pieces are there. In terms of building it out, all systems are tested for security vulnerabilities, independent of anything else. And then you actually build additional perimeter security and so on, right? I mean, very classic ways. You bring in security experts who look at the design, they test it out through, stress test it through various means, and also then physically do the testing and so on. So you take a very conscious approach of whatever the security parameter is, it's a stance. Things keep changing, and you have to be alert and constantly do that. And yes, you will see attacks, and you will have to see ways to defend and so on. It's a cat and mouse game, as everybody knows in this financial sector industry. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect, again, in the internal piece is is privacy by design. And in terms of privacy, it's again extremely important to take it seriously, because we're dealing with population scale. While we say country scale in India, it's India is almost the size of some continents. And so we have to deal with such massive scales that you have to take every aspect of privacy very seriously, including we started data minimization. We took the principles of privacy by design back in 2010. Just a couple of years before that is when they'd been formulated. And we made sure that we tested our internal design of Aadhaar against every one of those principles, so that we could make sure we were starting on the right foot. So we collected data, we minimized the amount of data we collected, we kept it secure, we made sure that our interfaces don't leak information, and so that it becomes very difficult for people's privacy to be violated. Of course, it still leaves us with one or two gaps. The first gap, which you rightly pointed out, was the users themselves, because a lot of security issues, etc., are really, where people are not aware of what's happening, and they can be easily fooled through, things like phishing attacks and so on into sharing information, which could later cause a compromise. And so from that perspective, educating users to be careful with their data, with their OTPs, with their passwords is very important. And in that, I think a regulator has played a tremendous role in the financial ecosystem. RBI has constantly run these campaigns called RBI Kehta Hai, which sort of highlight the issues of the moment and make sure that people are aware through mass education. The UIDAI also ran mass campaigns around the time, in the early days when people were being enrolled, as to what the advantages were, but also what people should do to secure their own data and their own privacy. And so I think it's been an important element of the growth of the ecosystem that we keep educating our users. We do that. We also work with the ecosystem. Again, none of these things is a central entity that builds these systems out. Sure, there is one such entity in the case of Aadhaar or NPCI, but its growth comes from the various partners we work with. So UIDAI had the authentication user agency. First is the enrollment agencies on the enrollment side. And then on the usage side, you have the authentication user agencies and KYC user agencies who are well identified, vetted, who in turn have to make sure that they educate their users to do the right thing. The same we see in the payment ecosystem. You see all of the payment players going out there and helping to make sure that their users stay safe. And this is an approach that works at our scale. We have obviously, I think evolved in a way so far that we haven't seen any disaster. But I think we have to continue to be watchful. We have to continue to educate our users, because the other guys are looking at systems at scale and say, hey, that's a target we should try and get to.
Thanks, Sanjay. So Nitin, building on that, since we had major challenges that we overcome with systematic approach there, on ONDC, since the approach is from bottom up, there's a large population that need to be aware of ONDC as a concept, right from the buyers and sellers, and then the peripheral ecosystem that comes in alongside with the probably a lending infrastructure to SMEs on OCIN 4.0 and other things, right? So Antler and you are essentially building the ecosystem to make sure that talent is getting developed to make the fuel for this momentum go much more faster there. So, Nitin, if you can tell us something about how you're building this ecosystem and what will it take to further fuel this more exponentially, and how various ecosystem partners are coming together. Let it be the ONDC incubator, it be accelerators that are coming around, and the entities like Antler who are investing into very focused areas at ONDC. So if you can just give us a high level areas on how exactly this ecosystem is getting developed, right from the talent to the investment part broadly, and what are the challenges that you see, what needs to change to make sure that this essentially takes off with much more faster pace. It's already, I'll say, core innovation, but what will it take to make sure that adoption is going to be much more viral, much more faster at the ground level at Bharat as a wider base there?
So a few thoughts. I think so. We are obviously not the creators of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so some of the questions around design choices are better answered by ONDC itself. But what my view is that it's what I like about it's a protocol. It's not a platform. It's not anything which is so all best protocols are obfuscated, right? Like we use email, we don't really know that SMTP is being used, or when you browse a page, you don't know that HTTP, you don't know how it works. So I think similarly, part of the solution here is that the market participants, sellers, buyers, the experiences that will get created, this will all be in the background. So I don't think that the fundamental experience for the end user will look very different versus transacting online in any way that they currently do on a marketplace. I think the question that you've also asked is the onboarding of buyers and sellers onto applications or platforms and intermediaries, which will really bring millions of buyers and sellers onto ONDC. That has started happening in India. In commerce, it will take maybe a little longer. And I think, as Sanjay said, sometimes these things are slowly, then suddenly. So the curves look like more linear for a while before they look exponential. We have made 4 investments. There are multiple companies which are onboarding hundreds and thousands of sellers onto ONDC, helping sellers who have never been on any online platform just learn things like cataloging. And I think to some degree, perhaps Gen AI could play a role there in the future as well. But there is a bit of hand-holding required, and it's a little bit of a combination of product and service. So there are companies in India already doing that in the tens of thousands in the seller numbers. The buyer side is where the ecosystem is currently stuck. What will happen is that the large distribution platforms, many of the people in the audience would have heard of the Google Pay, Phone Pay, Paytm, and others, will have already started to experiment. They've, Phone Pay, which is affiliated to Flipkart, has a product called Pin Code, which is a separate buyer app in a way. So there has been movement. I think there are numbers in the range of 100,000 transactions a day that are being talked about by end of the year. But it is still small, and it will probably be something that accelerates in 2024. And then in the middle, on the sellers and buyers, you have what's called TSP. So technology service providers, middleware or various pieces of plumbing from reconciliations and grievance redressals and so on that have to be built out. Some are being built out. We have a company called Blotch, which is helping a lot of large enterprises figure out how they will manage infrastructure and nodes when they come onto ONDC. So the short summary of this is that it is accelerating, it is taking shape, and I don't think that the end user experience will be, if anything, it will be simpler. One of the reasons that we are excited about something like ONDC and decentralization in this form is that in India, most of the content on commerce is in English, maybe 95%. But if you look at actual content consumption and sharing on social media, I would argue that maybe it's the opposite. Maybe 5 or 10% is actually in English. So I think that there will be a lot of innovation on these fronts to bring vernacular users, many more new types of categories which don't currently sell online. In terms of the part about talent density, yes, that is our view is, we are a very early stage venture firm. We call ourselves day zero investors. We think of what we call -1 to 0. Our specialty is to actually invest in people and ideas before they sometimes have even been finalized as ideas or the teams have been formed. So I think for us, it's a good stage to play where ONDC is today. And Mr. Nandan Nilekani, who is one of the best known faces in India in the technology world, him and ONDC, it's a partnership that we have with various stakeholders to try work on this talent density part, which is just a fancy way of saying that more people should start companies on ONDC. And there are many reasons why entrepreneurs are not yet starting, because some of the roadmaps are not clear, or because there is a chicken and egg problem. The seller apps don't know, they cannot grow until the buyer apps come online, and so on and so forth. But I think our job is to give people a sense of the possibilities, give founders one platform where they can get a lot of their questions answered and connect to the various stakeholders in a very efficient way, and find others in the community who are also interested in these problems, and really expand the definition of the design space, right? What all can be possible. So the community, we have a lot of founders are currently running services companies, trying to figure out if they can build a product. They may be already working on something else and maybe pivoting to ONDC. There are young founders who are thinking of starting something from scratch. So I think it will need another year or so but we believe that just within our program, we expect maybe 50 new ventures will get started. So that's just us. And I hope that there will be a Cambrian explosion, in the hundreds of startups in the next couple of years around ONDC, because that's how some of these things actually take shape. If you have enough talent density on people creating, then suddenly large corporations will start paying attention. Folks like FIS hopefully will get very involved. And then the ecosystem starts to take shape. And there could also be some top-down interventions which answer your question, like maybe the government might push certain use cases more, or government procurement, etc. Perhaps, we have no idea of what that looks like, but potentially that could be another needle mover.
Thanks, Nitin. So that brings to the next question, and probably Sanjay, you may give first attempt to answer that. So India is leading its way to digital public infrastructure and is becoming kind of a reference model for the entire globe there. And then multiple interoperable systems are coming in place where we are able to now do UPI from other countries, as well as some of the models on ONDC as a base protocol is getting used at various levels, right? So Sanjay, based on your vantage point, and you have been working at policy level, you are working at investments from Bharat Innovation Fund, right? So for larger corporations, larger enterprises, and we have also seen a shift from startups which are earlier doing the innovation on the silos, but now they are working for plumbing on the enterprise level. And some part of this digital public infrastructure is really getting used in terms of customer onboarding journeys, etc. So to some extent, every large enterprise will need to have a digital public infrastructure as, let's say, like mobile strategy. You also need now DPI strategy there. Now, from your vantage point, can you let us know how the enterprises are essentially looking at this as a DPI, as a, I'll say, major initiative and something that is going to disturb the fintech financial ecosystem. And that's where now it's time for not just startups to think about this, but to the large enterprises also to have a very clear roadmap and strategy about how do you make this as a part of their overall roadmap. And many of the enterprises are also already being into this momentum directly or indirectly. So to your vantage point, how do you send a message to the enterprise, specifically the enterprise plumbing part, where many of the startups are building customer onboarding journeys, as well as more on the digital public infrastructure. And some of them are also building plus, so essentially AA plus or ONDC plus stacks on their road to grow further. And at some point, they will become major kind of emphasis on the enterprise scale moments there. So Sanjay, over to you about your thoughts on those areas.
So I think, Prashant, before we start, I want to correct one thing. I
Mhm.
worked on the policy side in the sense that I worked on implementing some of these systems, in terms of the design and implementation of Aadhaar, UPI, etc., in the early days. I've been out of the policy space since a long time now. I moved from being a designer to being an evangelist and then to being an investor. So there was really no overlap in those two. So I just want to be very clear about that as you go ahead. Now, coming to the enterprise adoption, because clearly, we've already seen quite a bit of it's actually very natural for enterprises to adopt these systems, right? So if you think of ID, one of the earliest users of eKYC was Reliance Jio. They were launching, for them, they were going to be enrolling a whole bunch of people into their system on a daily basis. And for them to reduce costs of onboarding was a no-brainer. And the same is true for banks onboarding people using Aadhaar. So we do see that it's when it's presented with a cost-benefit analysis, all of these systems actually are better than the existing ones, and hence for large enterprises that turns out to be a very big advantage, because they immediately see the financial benefits of adopting them. So that's, I think, on the supply side. On the cost side, whenever we have reduced costs, people have come on board right away. It's rarely been much of a challenge. I think with where we are looking at market creation, I think an ONDC is a great example. Similarly, with OKIN, we are seeing, I think, is a great example. You're trying to find places where enterprises are going to say, this is a way, if I do this well, I'll get more users. If they're able to see that benefit, then they will try to come on board. And the more they come on board, the more successful that API becomes, because suddenly you've got this large player, because network effects are non-linear, right? So when you get 2 or 3 large players and a whole bunch of small players, just this Cambrian explosion sort of thing happens, where you have all sorts of combinations going on, all sorts of use cases being tested and tried, because somebody's done the work of bringing users into that ecosystem. And so that network effect, I think, plays out very well. But for large enterprises, they, for them to come in before the network effect plays out, they have to see a distinct advantage to being on the system. Much as, all the senior leadership talks about innovation, these are experiments till they see a real business advantage, right? And so I think what every one of these population scale systems we have looked at in the India Stack story, or the digital public goods, comes with an intrinsic business benefit to those who participate. And that, I think, is what allows large enterprises to make that decision very easily. And then, of course, if you see sort of a trend of saying that these things have succeeded in the past, your ability to imagine how this will play out in the future continues to go up. You have that belief. And I think we are at this point, our belief is cascading. It's growing with every system being built and launched. And so, which is a great feeling, but also very scary, right? I mean, because then you have to deliver, the expectations go up. And so I think we are at that point, and I'm actually very, very bullish that we have made sure that all of these systems as designed provide intrinsic benefit. So people will come in independent of the network effects, but by coming in, they will create the network effects.
So in fact, many of the startups we have seen on lending space, customer journeys, hyper-personalization are very intricately related to DPI. So Nitin, next question is to you. On the ONDC side, have you seen some early indications of larger enterprises being part of this journey? And then potentially the larger players probably will look into this. And I'm sure there are a few examples already in place there, but do you see that enterprise adoption and collaboration between startups and enterprises on these new innovations happening. And as a Antler, as a VC, do you also work with CVCs to bridge these gaps between the enterprise plumbing and the startup innovations that are happening broadly as a collaborative investor into those innovations?
So I think, as Sanjay said, I think experiments, yes. And the interesting thing here is that, in the case of UPI, the conversation was a lot about the MDR, the merchant discount rate, or essentially the part of the payment that banks or other financial institutions would make or lose. I think, payments anyway sort of a very high operating leverage, but volume business. In commerce, you have almost the opposite. You have essentially lots of transactions, and many cases where you have 10, 15, 20, 30% margins. So I think that the interesting question that we have in our mind is, there is actually money to be made, right? So it is not a case of, how currently there is a value chain and it could look different, but there might be enough money for people to make on the buyer side, seller side. So I think this is both, an opportunity for large enterprises to understand, and also potentially a disruption in some cases. And, I think a lot of large enterprises are watching this carefully. A lot of them have announced initiatives. A number of them have talked to us in the context of what we are doing and what types of incubations are happening. ONDC itself is a consortium, I believe, of 19 different banks, financial institutions, folks like the payment processors. So I think there's already sort of a buy-in at that level. And then on top of it, you have, the banks trying to understand it, but the tech platforms like Google have also dipped their toes and announced some initiatives. One of our portfolio companies, Plotch, is doing a partnership with them to create a voice assistant for merchants to go on ONDC. And so I think right now, a lot of interesting experiments, more from corporate teams, not CVCs, to your question. But the volume on the non-mobility side is what I think we are waiting for it to take off in a big way. It is the building pieces, building blocks are being put in place. On mobility, which is maybe not the answer to your question, but I think the audience would find a use case or an example very helpful, because they might be wondering what this ONDC thing is. So there is an app called NamaYatri, which hasn't really spent anything on marketing, and it was a very bottom-up effort, which is built on top of backend protocol. ONDC is for commerce. Backend has other use cases in mobility, education, etc., which is another thing to understand, that ONDC is the commerce part of it, but this protocol can power a lot of other things in financial services, education, mobility, energy, EVs, etc. So India is going through a really exciting time when you look at that. So NamaYatri, I believe, has done 13 million trips already, and maybe on a daily basis does 50 to 60,000 auto rickshaw rides in one city in Bangalore, which is all of us are based in Bangalore. And that, I believe, anecdotally, is more than what Uber and Ola do on auto rickshaws. So think about it, right? A project which you would have not heard of has spent zero, has raised no money yet, and very organically, because the auto rickshaw drivers themselves like the new economics. They are evangelizing it with word of mouth, and it is gaining some real traction. That's 50, 60,000 daily transactions is obviously not tiny. So, I think I'm very excited by what new use cases take off organically, not necessarily top-down push.
Thanks, Nitin. So with that, I'd like to now sum up this panel, and thanks, Nitin, Sanjay, to be part of this discussions. We had wonderful participation from IN48 Partner Edition startups in last couple of weeks, where we have seen India Stack its core, and ONDC is something which is a fabric that is getting used. There's a lot of interest from outside India as well on these areas. In fact, we have a panel which will be following this panel, which is APAC investment landscape, where we are going to compare and contrast the different countries' infrastructures on digital public goods, essentially. And that is something which is going to bring out flavors more And we have a reference architecture here, and I'm sure that other countries also are in some shape or the other building on top of the policy layers to make sure that the fintechs are essentially getting that kind of a exponential push. And some of those reference models are something which probably are getting picked up from our UPI as well as ONDC Beacon Protocol, etc. And going forward, I'm sure that this traction is going to increase exponentially there. So looking forward for IN48 Partner Edition startups to look at ONDC, looking at the India Stack as a core to build upon. And with that, I'll really like to thank everyone to attend this, and hope to see you soon for the next panel there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Prashant. Thanks, Nitin.